Welcome back, everybody. I want to double check something. Who was here yesterday? Okay, maybe half the audience. That's good. So maybe I can reintroduce you a little bit to what we did yesterday. So yesterday we had a program that was really focused on care, deep listening. We looked at the panel Fragile Territories, where there was a lot of deep listening with kind of ecological elements that were also nestled within socio-political contexts. Today is going to be a little bit different, and I think to really introduce today, I have to recall a certain song that I grew up with from the Lebanese singer Fairuz. Is anyone familiar with who she is? So she sings in her song Altini Nay, she says, Altini Naya wa ghanni. Give me the nay and sing. فالغنى سر الوجود. For in singing is the secret of existence. وأثير الناي يبقى, and the humming of the nay stays بعد أن يفنى الوجود, even after existence ceases. Much like we encouraged deep listening yesterday in the panels of Fragile Territories, today we unlock another property of sound, particularly amplification. Sounds carry knowledge from the past, from the present, and these sounds highlight, safeguard our histories, traditions, and allow us to stay visible and allow us to fight back. These sounds become even more imperative amidst the impending and constant forces of a rager that we often face. Today we work with artists who do that, particularly that, who amplify histories, amplify bodies, and amplify resistance. So today I'd like to introduce two speakers who will be in conversation with each other. Let's say also artists. First is Bint Mbareh. Dina focuses on water in Palestine, challenging settler colonial epistemology by taking seriously Palestinian ways of knowing, from rain summoning music to shrine pilgrimage, as an instigator of political revolution. On the other hand, Brahim Tall shares the stories behind the work of the Choir of Dissonance, the creation of the sea, which is exhibited at the Brokachron almost for a week now. Yep. So if you haven't seen it, you have no excuse. As an installation that listens as much as it speaks. Through the singing of songs, they carry histories, relationships, and shared moments of trust. We had a third speaker who unfortunately could not join us today, Christine Ayo, who is going to talk about the Sonar project. So let me introduce the first speaker a bit more properly. So Bint Mbareh is a prolific sound researcher with a focus on water in Palestine. Her interest is in the physical parallel between water wave and the sound wave, leading into questions of border dissolutions between bodies, states, and between tenses, and into the possibility of being enveloped by voice, by sound, by communally, similarly to being enveloped by a water body. And I think yesterday we talked a lot about the need for poetry, erotics, for the need of kind of assigning new meaning to these oral traditions. And I'm really excited to see what Dina will do. So a big round of applause for Bint Mbareh.
Thank you, Abud. Can you hear me? Ha! Is this amplified? Okay, cool. It's like this, little alien thing that I have here, and I feel extra cyborgy. The last time I had a headset on, I was probably 14 years old. It would have been very feedbacky, so I'm nervous. But I don't really have much to say. I mean, I would like to try a couple of things together because I looked at the room and it's a perfect shape. We have exactly two people on each side and like this like kind of wave of this wave of people going around the middle. So I'm going to treat you guys like a wave as well, okay? So if you're comfortable with it, and it's okay if you're not, can you please try doing a hum with me? 1, 2, 3, closed mouth, hum. Oh, but maybe a little louder even. 2, 3. Very good. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we can do also something that graduates between a hum and a not hum. It's still going to be a hum, but it's going to be a slightly stranger hum, okay? So we can do like, okay? On one end, we have, and on one end, we have, so we can try that, but there really is a wave in the middle. So at some point, we're going to have to be doing, sorry, but it is the way that it is. You chose to come here today. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Sound great. And what if we try to... Sorry. That's love. What if we try to make that into something that has an open mouth in the middle and then closes like your shape here? Shall we try? My gesture is going to be like this. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I would still classify this as a whisper hum, which is not critique as such. I mean, I love what you're doing, but we can do something else. So when I do something like this, I'm gonna be loud. Okay. Okay. I can't do this, so you have to do it. Technically incapable of doing Okay, so the ball gets bigger in the mouth the higher I go. Okay, hope that's clear. Okay, awesome. Now, let me see. We have even a marker on the stage. Can everyone see this guy? No? Okay. I might use just this here. Everyone can see? Okay, cool. Thank you. So, we have to throw our sound into the bottle. Might not be clean afterwards, so we might have to get another one for the remaining speakers. Sorry about that. But all we have to do is make a sound that arrives directly here, and we will agree together or not. Say, that was kind of off-center. Maybe it didn't arrive entirely. Okay, let's try this. So the sound is going to be something like this. Ha! Okay, cool. Wherever you are in the room, you must aim here. Okay, so I'm going to aim from here, and I'll show you. Ha! 1, 2, 3. Ha! Okay, raise your hand if you feel like that arrived. I have a couple of shaken heads. Okay, we have one person who thinks that arrived in the audience. So cool, I think we're going to have to try again, sorry. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to say that was better. I'm not convinced still, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to sit with you guys. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think what's happening is you're not raising the, you have to, when you do your trajectory with an arrow, if you throw like this, it's going to arrive somewhere, and if you throw like this, it's going to arrive somewhere else. So you have to think of the beginning of the sound, ha, right, before you think of ha, 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 ha. Okay, so let's think ha, and you can feel that here, you can feel that here, you can feel that a little bit here as well. So we're not going to reach the end of the sound. 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, much better. Now by yourselves. 1, 2, 3. You think this is a joke to me? 1, 2, 3. This is like arriving maybe here, somewhere here, maybe a little bit. Okay, cool. Gotta try again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, without me now. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Thank you. Was that so much to ask for? Okay. How much time has passed? Cool. This is what I do for a living. Okay, I have no ways of describing it to you except for inviting you to try some of it with me. So this is kind of a practice that I call the choir for non-musicians sometimes. Sometimes I call it required presence, and the choir is written choir rather than Q-U-I-R. So I like to use the wordplay with choir, but generally it's a thing that I do where I try to invite people to use their voices together in ways that are not musical and are also not entirely verbal. And the space in between those things is a lot of stuff, but it helps us think about like what is a musician and kind of that category of like studentship into musicianship into genius also. And I can talk a little bit about those, but very briefly. And also like the use of sounds in a verbal way, which is like super logical. And both of those I found to be somewhat inadequate ways of expressing some of the research that I've done into rain summoning music in the past. And there's something about the invention of like a student. There's, I think, really beautifully written research by Moten and Harney about like how when something is a student, it is no longer able to be in the process of learning. It is trying to be the object of a student to arrive at studenthood. Similarly, for genius, there is like a kind of a removal of someone from their musical tradition And from their entire heritage and history of learning and making music together, and the meaning of music as something that is transmitted, the physical process of music as something that goes from one place to the other, into an object, which is the genius. And that object of genius is someone who is able to express music, it has the kind of expertise, I would say, to be allowed to express certain formats of music. And that kind of disallows a lot of like categories of expression, or non-categories of expression that may or may not lead up to genius, but are super worth their while, like the learning process. And like being a student who is constantly failing, and like being a kind of constant learner of one's own tradition, in the place where the tradition is or away from the tradition. So there's verbals, they're individualized, there's genius, it's individualized. Those are the ways that we know how to use our voices. But I insisted that there had to be another way. And I learned this because, I think somewhere we all know it, but my process of coming to that conclusion was that I studied rain summoning songs in Palestine in 2019. And I learned a lot from them, but I realized after a while that specifically I can sing them, and I will sing some of them to you later tonight, but that's not the vibe, really. Like people, it's kind of missing an entire cloud of, and a cloud, that is constantly expanding of people who are coming together to do call and response, kind of what the effect of sounding together is. It's missing the technology of how we learn music. It's missing kind of the technology of learning music together, learning music without inherently introducing a technology of punishment into learning. So all of those things were missing when I went on stage and sang a rain summoning song. So I wanted to look at the aspect of the music that was not musical, but was rather very social, was about learning, was about being together. And that is where the choir came from. And as time passed, I realized that there's a lot of literature, so I'm not the only one feeling this, but that there are two kinds of rooms, and many others, but the ones that I was experiencing were two kinds of rooms. One that a big sound by many people had passed through, and one where the sound of an individual had passed through. That's a way of understanding space, that's a way of understanding sound, that's a way of understanding sociality, that's a way of understanding what music is. That togetherness helped me understand sound from a totally different perspective, that it didn't have to exist again as an object, but could exist as a de-objectified kind of endless process. So taking sound and making it into listening, and making it into something which has no finality. And what I learned from that in particular, and that brings me back into research on rain summoning, is that some traditions really don't benefit from being documented and finalized and sat down in an ossified way, or even in a really respectful, non-ossified way. That in the tradition of rain summoning in particular, that there was this kind of element of, if I keep finding ways into it, then it is constantly growing. Then what we say about, oh, this tradition is going to die, this dying tradition of making music, this dying tradition of making fabric, this dying tradition, that death can really be challenged if we carry on not thinking of the tradition as an object, but rather as a process. So that was really important for me. Another thing that I found quite important was that when the tradition was not finalized, it was also resisting being known. So you could find it in a book, you could find the songs, and I can even send you the recordings of the songs that I made in my field research. They are amazing. They're like people who you have to nudge and nudge and nudge. Please sing the song to me, please. I will do anything for you. And then they sing, and it's like the world opens up, and it was an incredible experience to be able to hear those songs. But my learning was not exactly in being able to keep the songs as they are. It was instead in saying, I know this tradition now, And part of my role is not to transmit it, but rather to hide it. That part of my role in knowing the tradition was coming and doing something like this and saying, this is a rain summoning tradition, you know. And we have plentiful examples specifically from Palestinian culture, and I think this is something that maybe Palestinian culture secretly can teach somehow, is that hiding your culture is as important as showing your culture. That hypervisibility within the culture is in no necessary way leading to anything liberatory. Hiding the culture is as important as showing the culture. So that's what how I started to kind of transmit the rain summoning songs was through this kind of slightly ciphered performances, but also through something like the choir. And there was something in the choir where I started researching a little bit, like asking questions about how can I help everyone who's in the choir also hide a little bit in what I conceive now to be a world of hyper-surveillance, hyper-visibility, hyper-representation, constantly moving towards representation. For me, the choir was a respite from that, where at some point we have to think about, for example, my voice, in English at least, and I suspect that in lots of other languages, we say your vote, and that word comes from vox, one individual, one vote, one voice. So if the voice is a mode of increasing individuation and kind of manifesting more and more individuality, then how can vocalizing together challenge that? How can we throw our voices into the commons? That was one of the more constantly manifesting ways and reasons why I still want to do the choir. Because at some point it became really necessary, especially if you're Palestinian and you're constantly invited to represent and be represented and be seen and be shown. Then a big part of what I wanted to do was have a moment where we were doing the opposite of that, just to hide some parts of the culture. Because there are many examples, sorry, I think I began that sentence and then I forgot to end it. Anyway, there are many examples of aspects of Palestinian culture where as soon as it is shown, as soon as it is known, it is immediately exploited back into either a culture of hyper-surveillance or a way of tracking people down, or like genuinely dangerous ways of like you are not allowed to access this land anymore because it contains the kind of herbs that are used for medicine or the kind of herbs, blah, blah, blah. So knowing the culture for colonial forces, for Israeli colonial forces, is a direct way of asking, of inhibiting access to the culture. So for me, the choir and other technologies that I'm really looking into now of hiding ourselves became that kind of important thing of like, how can I help the culture be seen by itself only and not necessarily be represented outside of that context? Or at least problematizing what it means to be represented as an inherent good. Should I say some more things about water?
Yes, please.
Thinking out loud. I think that, yeah, again, there's this like physical parallel that I like to think about, which is between the voice. Sorry, how much time do I have? Like, I guess it's 11:59. Yeah? Oh, right. No. Oh, it says 10 minutes. Okay, cool. So I'll say about, I think I want to bring it to a recording that I heard of political prisoner Walid Daqqa, who was killed in the Israeli prison of Gilboa 2 years ago now. He spent 38 years in prison, and he was one of the most kind of proliferate writers. I know that some of you will be familiar with him from within a prison. He was also someone who liked to do jokes, like very practical jokes that were very harmful for the prison system. And I think I got into studying water partially because I naively thought that it was scarce, that there was really a problem in Palestinian landscape, that there was a problematic landscape that we had to learn how to kind of deal with, like what do we do in an arid landscape? This was all shattered in moments of actually studying and like living in the land. Of course, there are changes to the landscape which the entire world is experiencing, but we do not have a problem of inherent scarcity. We have a problem of distribution and injustice. And one of the things that really helped me to start learning about this was one of the writings of Walid Daqa, and one of his many practical jokes to the prison system was a 40-minute recording, which is now very widely distributed on SoundCloud and elsewhere. It's in Arabic. That sounds like it was recorded from a damn shoebox. Like it sounds like, you know, and fine, you know, that's also the circumstance of the recording. But hilariously, throughout his career in prison, those 38 years, he was one of the most prolific Palestinian writers. He conceived the child by smuggling. He's one of the first smugglers of sperm into the prison, and his child Milad, whose name means birth, is a beautiful, living, growing child right now in the world after his death. And in that recording, he says that one of the strangest and lesser considered aspects of being in the prison was constant surveillance. Not only, you know, of course, by the prison forces, you know, by very obvious divide, them, they are the ones who are imprisoning us. But in addition to that, also, I'm sharing a room with 6 people my entire life, like more than his entire adult life. So one of the things that he said was that I would love to be abluted, I would love to be cleaned by the sea. And this kind of movement into the sea by myself. And you know, for me, this is not like it's of course this metaphorical kind of I want to be in the water, and the significations of being cleaned by the water throughout religious and non-religious and secular histories of the world, sure. But also, just the sheer fact of this person in particular being in a series of prisons, many of which are quite close to the actual water, physically, geographically. But also, the fact of using the voice, which is something that is leaving the prison in this moment, in this particular recording, and at the same time, someone who's also, because of their biological processes, because of their humanity and much more than humanity, they are also peeing. They're also crying. They're also sweating. They're also doing all of these things. So there is a big aspect of what makes up their body, what is remembered in their body that is actually being rejoined with the world in the same way that their voices, regardless of the harshness of the actual prison system. And his description of water really helped me to think about that which disallows us from having hard borders, from being able to implement hard borders. No matter how much real, you know, money and techno-fascism we want to throw at those very real structured borders. And I think there are very many stories from prison that we can learn from in this way, but Walid Daqa is someone who articulates it really beautifully. And this is how I've been thinking of water for the past while, because the wave is something that moves across a border fluidly, I would say, and also makes it impossible to say, this water belongs to Jordan. This water belongs to Palestine. This water belongs to whatever else. All of everything we want to say about water ownership falls apart in practice. And that makes, and I'm referencing this book called Hydrojustice, which I don't know if I can recommend actually, but no, it's nice. It's not like, no, it's really good, but there's one of the passages of the book also says, clarifies that the word rival originates in the word river, or like small stream, something that means a small stream but sounds like river. And it's because a lot of the ways that people used to know whose land is who is also by the demarcation of water. Like a little stream passes through your land, and therefore on that side is yours and on this side is mine. But none of the water sources in the world know how to stay in one place. That is a myth that we invented so that we could have a map that is finalized. And with this movement, we freak out. But that's because we have decided to objectify rather than process water. That's not because water behaves in that way. So in some aspects of my practice now, I'm trying to invent new maps that are made of sound, made of voice, like I went to the river and I saw and many of the women that I spoke to when I was researching rain summoning songs sang exactly like this. They sang, we ask Sidna al-Khadr, we ask this shrine, we ask that shrine, all to give us the rain that we need for this season. So they weren't really only referencing, asking for the rain. They were asking this landscape for the rain. They were looking to that place for the rain. They were describing and singing this place to ask for the rain. And this place has its connotations. It's not simply land. It's land with magic. And that was for me a map, right? It's not a map that I can say to anyone. It's a map that I can say to someone, but it's not a map that you'll find written down anywhere. So it's this kind of non-finalized, completely useless to foreigners map, completely coded or encoded, kind of impossible to know kind of map that is pretty constantly changing because of the nature of the sound that makes it. It's about to dissipate all the time. That's not a sound that's going to exist in 5 seconds. That's how sound works. It's going to dissipate into the world. Because it's made of sound, it's not finalized, it's useless on many levels, and therefore very useful on other levels. That's the kind of map that I'm interested in. A map which does not pretend like the water lives in one place and does not live in the other place. It's a very, in that sense, much more accurate map than a map which says, here is the river. I think that's all I'm going to say. Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you. And should I stay here for a sec?
Sorry?
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, of course you can.
I can say, okay.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Dina. I think sometimes you hear a talk and you have a lot of questions and you have a lot of thoughts, and I do. But I think what stands out to me is that immediately I was first immersed in what you did in the beginning, and then I immediately have to think of what are the oral traditions that I'm maybe overlooking from my own perspective, right? And I'm like, oh, we have all these things. We have Zar in Egypt. We have all of these traditions that are also not so celebrated, studied, and so on. And I think yesterday we ended the day on a note of we have to reject modernity in order to take care of each other.
Yeah, for sure.
And what that actually means in practice is actually leaning into things that are not final, things that are always emerging, things where learning, imperfection are actually part of it, things that reject visibility.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for kind of walking us through that. And I want to be in conversation with you. But before we do that, I would like to introduce the second half of this panel and introduce Brahim Tall, who has the Choir of Dissonance, Creation of the Sea, which is a work that is being presented at Brakachrond. It's a beautiful installation that listens as much as it speaks. Whispered voices gather in space, grow louder from more fragile, fragmented utterances into a dense, collective presence that is a lot more harmonious. Brahim Tall's practice examines the black body in relation to media production and the ways in which media both generate, shape, and impact black experience. In his research, he focuses on the gazes historically produced by this relationship and attempts to disrupt and transform them by shifting their aesthetics. Big round of applause for Brahim Tall. Get it.
Hi, everyone. Is my mic on? Okay, yeah. So why is this doing what it's doing? I'm Brahim Tall, and I'm the creator of the Choir of Dissonance, the Creation of the Sea, which you can visit. I'm wondering who already has seen the work. Oh, quite a few people. That's nice. So I kind of want to go through the piece and how it kind of started, where it came from, where the ideas came from, and how I worked with all the people I collaborated with in a way to make this an actual piece. Funnily enough, there's a lot of similarities or overlap with what we just heard, and it's quite inspiring to talk about it together. But I think you already introduced my practice a little bit, but I think I wanted to introduce my practice a little bit so we can kind of go from there into how I created a sound piece, because I'm not a sound artist. I kind of mostly make visual art, so film, photography, and performance. And this piece also came from a performance originally. So in 2022, I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into the black body in relation to media production, which for me is kind of the starting point of everything, is like, how do we relate to bodies, and how do we interpret bodies, and how do we work with bodies as a society, as like how we consume media. And this kind of research for me started with my first film, which was called Tout Couleur, which I made in 2022. And it was a bit about, it started a little bit about like me as a mixed person and how I related to that as like a person, and how this kind of duality of blackness and whiteness produced a dissonance within myself, and how I wanted to explore that dissonance into what is blackness, and what is blackness also in relationship to media. So just as an example, I started working with Stanley Olivier, who is the performer, and we started working with like historic images of not only black people, but just historic poses like paintings, photography, and gathering them into a collection of poses that we thought were related, or we could relate to each other. So there were paintings of, for instance, Louis XIV, but at the same time also a lot of photography, like in West Africa there's a huge history of, or like a huge history of studio photography that is quite famous, with photographers like Malik Sidibé or like Seydou Keita and Samuel Fosso, and these were like the initial sparks of how to work with this film. So yeah, you can see we worked with like these historic poses, and that became the sequences of the film, while also working with skin tone and shifting skin tone throughout the film to kind of reflect on our gaze and how we look at a body that shifts between signifiers that we normally don't see shifting within a scene. So that's an example of how I work with the body and how I work with the gaze. So I think those are the two things that you can relate to each other. Then this is a performance I did with my brother that I also did here at the Brakke Grond, I think 2 years ago, during museum night, in which we would braid each other's hair. So this was also kind of in relation to these kind of black or like African traditions that are very, very, very important, and that have a certain ceremonial or like gathering quality to them, but at the same time are just a little bit banal. Like we're protecting our hair. It's just something we do. I have braids right now that my stepmom put in when I was in Senegal 2 weeks ago. So like it has something banal, but at the same time, it has such a big quality of coming together, talking about your day, talking about your life, and sharing care with each other in some form or way. Like, and for us, this was kind of foreign because my mother is white and my father is black, and fathers, like in general, aren't really good at transmitting culture. I'm not saying they don't, but like a lot of culture flows out of mothers, I feel. So we started to explore this together, and also exploring this like physical labor, like the time it takes to braid someone's hair. It's like you don't do it in 1, 2, 3. It takes hours and hours and hours, depending on the style you want to do or how skilled you are. We were really not skilled, so it took very long. So the performance was this durational piece of just braiding each other's hair, talking about the intimacy of our relationship and the relationship with our parents and just our lives, which was kind of also taking the audience with us in that kind of physicality of time and duration was very important. I don't remember the next slide, I'm sorry. So yeah, to go into the actual piece that I have to talk about, the creation of the sea, which was originally actually a text that I wrote in 2022. And in this text, I was working a lot around the idea and the concept of like labels and the way we label things in society, how we label people, how we label ourselves in a way, and how I always felt like this labeling had a really constraining element to it that I struggled with myself. So I started writing a text, a very sassy, a very provocative text, where I challenged this idea and was like, we could use labels, but we have to find the fluidity behind them. We have to be open to this idea of process, like not the object, but the process, just as we heard, which is very funny. And to me, the sea was a very good metaphor or body that could, that made it possible to explore this in a very tangible and visual way. If you see the sea as like an endless plane that changes constantly and has endless depth and has a topography that like you cannot make a topography of because it's in constant change, you can use it as a very beautiful metaphor of like, what if we are the molecules of the water in the sea that are rolling over each other and constantly engaging with each other, but also changing spaces and places without staying in one place. Like, this was a bit my idea, and it excited me a lot. So I started frantically writing about the sea. And in this text, in the introduction, at some point, this text I didn't really want it to be like only about what I was writing and reading at my kitchen table. So at some point, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna interview my friends and people I know about their interpretation of blackness. And the goal of this interview was not necessarily to have a definition of blackness, but to liquefy the definition of blackness, to change it into like this, we can talk about blackness, but we have to realize that everyone has a different interpretation of it. So I described these interviews as a choir of dissonance. I was like, I want these voices, instead of harmonizing and being like, yeah, and being black is, there's of course overlap. Like, I think there's a lot of things that people repeated, but at the same time, there was also this idea of, besides the harmony, what's the dissonance? And next to the dissonance, what's the noise? And going so, like trying to go so far into this idea of noise that it breaks your ideas and liquefies them and your labels into the, and it kind of like splashes out into the sea, and it becomes the sea. So that was kind of the idea behind it. And yeah, I read a bunch of things, like these were a little bit some of the references I had at the time. But at some point I was invited by Gouvernement, which is an organization in Belgium, to take part in a kind of festival they were doing called Night Shift, which was in Ostende in 2022. And they were like, hey, Brahim, you want to join us and do this with us? And I was like, yeah, okay, fair. But I didn't have a work. And I kind of thought suddenly, like, I can actually make this choir that I wrote about in my introduction, I can make that a thing. I can actually try and make a choir of dissonance. So yeah, I went a bit. This is a poem I wrote at the end of the text that's also in the piece. Like, if you go and watch the piece, you'll be invited by like whispers. If no one's in the space, the piece is whispering, and it's like every single person is whispering this poem in their native language or their mother tongue. But let's dive into that later. So it became a performance. And I didn't have anything. Like I didn't have any text. I had my text, but I didn't have anything to write. No songs. I'm also not very skilled at writing songs, so I invited a friend of mine called Lisa Wambach to work on it together, and we are very much inspired by Julius Eastman to write like 4 verses. I'm just gonna play a very, very short, I'm just gonna play what inspired us from Julius Eastman. I don't know if anyone knows Julius Eastman. No? Okay, two people, 3 people. So Julius Eastman was a black composer, mostly working from New York or based in New York, that made kind of this revolutionary types of composed revolutionary songs, and they were often very, very, very scattered in a way. But I'll just play a short example. So at the time, I became very obsessed with this, and I was like, this is amazing. This is such a good starting point. But we still need a text, so we wrote 4 verses that were completely based on the original text of the creation of the sea. And those 4 were, I become the sea, so the choir would express its longing to become the sea, to become one, but at the same time also like this togetherness, but at the same time also keeping a sort of like individualism. Then the second was bound by friction in space, so this idea of like rolling over each other as bodies and being connected and changing places constantly. Then the third was always becoming, so this constant change within the sea. And then the last was the I am the sea, like the release, as in we're the sea, and it worked and we're happy. So, oh yeah, I have an example of what it looked like, just really shortly. At that time. So the idea was like we would sing in harmony at first, and the harmony would always break into into dissonance, which would become a noise, and then one person would start singing the next harmony, and the rest would join. So this was a little bit the idea, and that's still the case in the installation right now. So it was a very beautiful experience to do with like a lot of people, but later, also in my research, but also through conversations with Sophia Dati, who's like a curator in Brussels, she mentioned this talk, or like this video of a talk between Bell Hooks and Arthur Jaffa, which is like people that I look up to a lot, but like that they mentioned this thing about the autonomy of black people and their image in media, and that black people often don't really have that much autonomy of their bodies, even if you would place yourself and on a stage or in a film. It's very difficult to maintain that autonomy. So it was something that immediately sparked this idea of like, how can we play with that? How can we play with the black body and at the same time remove it in some way or make it be present without actually physically being there? So I feel like that's also this thing of hiding somehow, like not always giving everything away. So this idea came of like, what if it's a sound installation? What if we create a body of sound, a body of resonance, a body of vibration, rather than physical bodies in space? So I was invited by M. Leuven, which is the main museum in Leuven, to do a residency. And my first thought was like, I want to make the choir, I want to do this and create a sound installation. But again, the performance was there, but how do you transfer that into an installation? And slowly but surely we started going into this idea of, okay, what if every singer gets their own speaker? Okay, so we have, let's say 20 singers, then we need 20 speakers. Okay, we get 20 speakers. Okay, how do you get 20 speakers to play separately? Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you record it? Do you want to record it all together? Do you want to record it separately? And it was a very, very slow and interesting, but also beautiful process into transforming this performance into an audio piece, like an audio installation. And a lot of questions at the beginning that were like super vague actually made sense. Like they kind of answered themselves. They kind of made sense. Like, of course you make, like it's like, now I'm saying of course because I take it for granted, but like, I feel like a lot of the elements that are inside the text, that are inside the piece, that are inside this idea of becoming the sea, kind of were physically necessary to create this piece. So in the end, we made this kind of motherboard that you can see that hangs in the middle that connects all these individual speakers together. So there's this individuality in a way, but also a tetheredness, like you're connected to something. You're connected to a grounding element that pushes the work forward and like makes it possible. So this, for me, it was also beautiful, as in like how the technical restrictions also were in line with what I wrote about or what I thought the piece was, and that you can always also visibly see. This was a very deliberate choice, that you can always visibly see. We don't hide the production of the work. Like, it was a very, very important part of it. So throughout the process, we kind of got to this point of like, okay, everyone gets a speaker, so everyone also needs their own voice in a way. Like, everyone needs to do their own thing. So we expanded the piece a lot. This is my mama. And wrote like a very deliberate version of it, because the first version was very simple. There were not really a lot of like professional singers involved. It was difficult to harmonize. It was difficult to dissonance. But with this piece, we could control this a little bit more and go into it a lot deeper. But at the same time, also ask people, because we eventually decided to do individual recordings. We could ask people, improvise on what we wrote and do your thing with it. So here you could see all the speakers, and we decided in the end to also make the speaker the size of the person that's singing. So each person, you can see them, like here are also the names, but like you can see from smallest to biggest, like we also anthropomorphized in some way these speakers into like a bunch of, I don't know, weird bobbly head stands. So yeah, this became like we just wrote kind of blocks, and those kind of like I always describe it as Lego blocks. Like we just had like the first thing like I become the sea, and then they would repeat that, like the people that were singing would repeat that, and then we asked them to do like 6 repetitions, and then asked them, can you do an improvisation on it? And we went through the whole thing like that. And I thought, I don't think I have time. I wanted to go into the Ableton session to see like what that means, but I don't think we have time. I think I have to, I'm over time. But regardless, go see the piece. I highly recommend it. I'm not biased at all. And thank you for listening. Hi.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm going to invite you to have a seat. Invite Dina up on stage as well, because we got to talk.
Let's talk.
And I got to say, as a seasoned Arab, I think that's what I call myself, who grew up in the Levant in a very Pan-African household, I'm in Candyland.
I can imagine.
Thank you guys for sharing. I think my first question is, you know, when people ask you what radicalized you, it's a little bit of that. Is like, what was the spark? It's like a bit of like lore about both of you. What was the initial spark that kind of led you to go into, first of all, for you, it's like sound as a new medium, and for you, sound as a collective practice. So what was kind of the really initial, push towards that? So I'll ask you.
You want to go?
You can go. I just talked for 15 minutes.
I'll give you a break. I'll give you a break.
Yeah.
What was a spark? I think that I actually have kind of a conservatory education, which is at the end of that, I was ready to never touch an instrument again for a really long time. So, I mean, it's like okay, let's reel it back in. Okay, so if we're going to talk about modernity, let's talk about the conservatory as one of those, one of the products of the modernity, which it's not like personal to me, you know, but I experienced music education as a form of punishment. And it was like an extremely privileged position to be in, to have a music education. So still, I loved it. I knew that I was going to do it, and I said that regularly as a child and a teenager, I'm going to make music. But then there's a lot of like self-hatred that you can fall into when you start making music within the context of the conservatory. And I also, when I re-entered music, it was through anthropology. So I got a degree in the anthropology of music. I never studied art, and I would say I kind of never studied music in a way. I'm not that kind of nerd. But that there was. I'm saying all this to say that the way that I learned music was like politicized in such a way that it was trying to, in that phase of like Palestinian life where we were reaching for statehood. And when a lot of countries tried to reach for statehood over the last century, what they did was establish a music for the country, right? So I was in that world, you know, and I played in the Palestinian Youth Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And which is like not related to the state and was not related to anything official, but it was all of those kind of like signifiers and the namings, and we're going to reach towards statehood. And I think maybe I didn't articulate it then, but there was some part of me that really understood that the only way to learn that kind of music is to be constantly punished back into a specific modality of learning, modality of playing, registers of singing, and some things would be rewarded and some things would not be rewarded. And I say all this again not to criticize the institutions, because there are so many like extremely generous people who mean now that I can really like play music. But and that brings me kind of like to like I was in an orchestra, and now in 2026 I'm having conversations with people about like how the orchestra is really a way of like representing statehood in music, because it's like this thing that we use to amplify our voices so loudly that really does not allow for improvisation, and like really kind of punishes like microtonality, for example, or you know. So I think it was that thinking on music, that the impossibility of bending the impossibility of things existing outside of categories. I mean that from the scale of like the note to the scale of the orchestra to the scale of like repertoires of music, and that which leads us to this musician is a genius and this musician is the way that music should be made. And all of this, I think, kind of guides me back to like Abbott, what I experienced when I asked people to sing to me. And I studied the kind of 9 villages in the West Bank. And all I did was ask people to sing to me. What I experienced in that mode of learning really was very, like, I guess that, if really we had to put it in a sentence, that radicalized me.
Yeah.
Asking someone to sing to me radicalized me, because that music it was not for entertainment, it was not for the state, it was not something that was ever documented, it was but it was to literally bring the rain. Like, people had hesitations to sing to me because they thought, oh, but we don't really need it to rain right now.
Yeah.
You know? So, do you know what I mean? And
It's
so
like really useful, you know.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I'm doing this for a purpose.
yeah. Okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah, but I think it's to me it sounds like also giving permission to yourself to have a relationship with the musical tradition beyond academia and beyond kind of beyond the institution. And I think for me that is already a refreshing idea, is that you don't have to follow kind of the script in that sense. So thank you, Ibrahim.
Yeah, it's funny, like going into music, I was always into music. I organized a lot of parties when I was when I was a teenager, and I was producing music, and I was really bad at it, and it was just not really my thing, but I loved it, and I didn't, like, I studied photography, like something completely, but throughout the process of developing my practice, like mostly also in school, I just went to art school in Brussels. Throughout developing my practice, I kind of felt that I didn't really wanted to be tied to a medium, and it just resulted in me kind of feeling free to do whatever a work needs, or like whatever a work wants, or like to also see, like, I could have written the text and then be like, that's a text and that's finished, but then I think it's not necessarily radical or something, but like, I feel for me, it's just this thing of constant process. Is just, oh, this work is that now. What can it be? What else can it be? So I go then into, like, as I explained, like, okay, it can be a performance, but then what else can it be? And then it goes into an audio installation, and maybe in 5 years we're here again, and it's like, I don't know, like a drone show or something. I don't know. Say so random. Exactly. Like, just more to say, like, it can shift, like, things kind of shift constantly, also within what I feel like when I read text, or when I watch movies or see art, it inspires me, and then something comes and it's just, oh, this thing is not, like, the next thing is gonna be a film.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, I don't think it's that radical, it's just fun.
Maybe fun is radical, right?
Yeah, maybe fun is
I think I
radical.
read lately Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, and I think that to me, the concept of emergence, I see in both your talks. I think my next question is really about Surprise, the White Gaze, right? Because I think both your works are really situated. You know, there's almost like archival, I don't want to say ancestral material that you're working with, oral traditions that you've lived, that are lived experiences. But then I think you are presenting it here, you know, in predominantly, let's say, white Western spaces. How does that, first of all, inform your work, or how do you maybe protect your work from that kind of dialogue? Whoever wants to go first, I'll let you guys.
I don't have an answer at the moment.
Again,
all right, she got it.
I have it memorized. I think worth noting that in the many, like, what feels like hours of running my mouth, there has not been a rain summoning song out yet. Out of my mouth, at least, you know, I've kind of, and I think that I talked a lot about, like, that, I think finding ways of encrypting the work is in itself the game. That's where I'm at in my practice right now. Like, finding the ways that the work is not something that can be shown or seen. And then the product of that research is the work, like the choir being a place where you do not individuate your voice but hide it, for example. I think there's a lot of that in the work, but I'm going to give the example of like pieces of text that we use quite often when we sing the choir, and it's called Three Voices by Umashankar Mantravadi, and he is someone who is a sound archaeologist, I guess. But it just means that there's like pieces of text in the world that are historical, and you can read those pieces of text, and then that reading of the piece of text, which describes a sound in a space, for example, can help you reconstruct that space. So there's like an architect. Anyway, we read that piece together as a choir many, many times, written by Umashankar, and we go and we go and we go and we go. And at the end of that going, we realize that the language becomes more of a pulp, like a medium that, you know, when you say a word 1,000 times, suddenly it's not necessarily something that's legible. So I think a lot about legibility by converting language into something that's a sound rather than something that's used for communication or transmission. Because the process itself is the process of transmission. When I do this with my voice and it reaches you, that's a transmission. It doesn't matter what, you know, that is less relevant. And so I think that that's one of the ways that, for example, the texts that I use have a way of hiding themselves. And I'm going to give the second example of a slightly longer explanation, but very quickly, there's a kind of star in Palestine called Saad al-Khabaya and many others. And then when the star rises in the sky, we know that that is the beginning of a specific season in January. It's like one of several micro seasons, and the rising of that star says to you, please plant the onions right now, or like make sure that you don't kill your chickens. I don't know. I mean, or something, you know. So there's a way of like knowing time like that. And the way that I learned about that star was Saad al-Khabaya بتفتل الصبايا, or Saad al-Khabaya بيطلعوا الحيايا. So there's those proverbs, ways of rhyming with the meaning of the star, mean that there's a way of like transmitting the information that's a little bit hidden and a little bit not hidden, a little bit also about transmission. It plays that double role. And I was looking for a tattoo to give to one of my friends through a manuscript from 13th century Qazwin. And in that book, there was mention of Saad al-Khabaya, Saad Bala, and those micro seasons that I had mentioned earlier. And I realized that we'd been hiding them, you know, that they were in manuscripts, they were written down, they were also in like actual literature from the area, but the way that we were using the proverbs was a way of hiding. And it's linguistic as well, right? Because so inherently it's like, it's linguistic, but it's oral, not written down linguistic. So it's inherently going to disappear very quickly, you know, it's very hard to catch. And I think that's what draws me to sound altogether, because I think I really need a medium that where I can play with decay. And it's decaying very quickly, you know, so we can do the decay very fast. That's what happens with a proverb. If it's linguistic, that's what happens with a text when it's being like chewed on by 30 people at the same time. I really enjoy that, and it's really central to the work. I don't know if it's about the white gaze. I think it's about not ever landing in a finalized identity.
But I think we've decentered already, like in your answer, we've decentered the white gaze.
Oh
right?
yeah, I forgot about it.
I mean, which is, I think it's good, and I think what you're saying essentially is that a big part of this is that if you know, you know, you know.
If you know, you know. Yeah,
if you know, you know, and that's a way of kind of encoding things within proverbs. And I think a lot about like Walter Benjamin's task of the translator, where by transmitting something in your own perspective, you are encoding meaning into it in a certain way. Brahim.
Yeah, I think for me, there's just this, I think there's two elements to it. On the one hand, because I work a lot with the visual, like with film and photography, there was, on the one hand, playing with visual languages in such a way that you kind of become aware of your own gaze. And that was a big thing for me, just like a lot of media production, a lot of film and photography in some way hides its own production. And a lot of people, like, you watch a movie, you don't realize there's like 50 people on set that are there to hide their own work. And I think that that lack of transparency produces a naturalization of what we see or what we hear or what we do. Like all that work kind of it's funny enough, like it hides itself, but then to naturalize what we see, which I think is problematic in a way. So I think that's also part of like showing the motherboard and like showing like all these things. It's like showing the production of something or the language within image can sometimes make someone aware of what they're seeing or like of what they're like of their own way of seeing it, of like, oh whoa, this is produced something, like I have to be aware of that somehow and highlighting it in some way. But then at the same time, for me also the thing of process also goes beyond something that's capturable, which is a lot easier said than done. I feel like being captured is it just happens all the time. Like you're trying to escape, but you're being captured, and then you transform to escape capture again. So I think that's also one of the elements I think of my practice specifically, is just like how to transform constantly to not necessarily be captured. So also again like a fluidity, liquefying oneself, because holding a liquid is harder than holding a solid, I guess. So I that's the most often the way I think I approach it somehow. But it's just a difficult, sometimes also hard fact of like, if you want to work with institutions or if you want to do art as professionally, it's very difficult to escape like very wide spaces. And I think it's also a thing of like, okay, do you want to relate to it or do you want to not relate to it? And somehow it is impossible to not relate to it, because it's like, especially like mostly in the West, and that's also where I grew up, like it's like ingrained and interwoven with everything. So how do you start picking it apart? Or do you go through it? Like, do you make a hyper version of it? Like these types of things, like, can you make a hyper version? And I think that's also this idea of for instance, having different visual languages, for instance, in a film. It's like is making this hyper thing that you put next to each other, and people are like a bit confused by that in a way, but that's because
I can't put it in a box.
Because it's like,
there's no canon
and
here.
It switches. Or in my film Tukula, like switching skin color in the same shot, like through film techniques, but then also displaying those film techniques in a way, is confusing for a gaze in some way. Like it's trying to like make a hyper version of something represented, and suddenly the character is ungraspable or something. So
I feel like it's also there's something to say about the role of dissonance. Because you're both employing it so well. I want to talk so much more, but I don't want to hug the conversation. Maybe one question from the audience, something urgent and pressing and provocative. Any questions?
None.
I have way more, so I can just keep going. All right. One more question for you. I think if you look at your practices, and I think the process is really important for both of you, right? And it's very, to me, there's a communal element, right? Because you mentioned before, the more I talk to people, to ask them to sing to me, the more I see something. So here, how do you balance this kind of collectivity with kind of your own vision of the work, right? Because you want to create something based on the people that you ask, the people that you're with, that you're doing these practices with. The work changes a little bit. So how do you kind of put yourself in conversation as an artist with the collective practice?
You go first.
I think I mean, worth noting that I guess I've been practicing for the past like 10 years, and I don't have any released music in the world. Well, kind of not true, but I mean, very rare. I don't really like produce finalized works that live in places. So, I can sing by myself in a room, but ultimately, like resonance with groups of people is kind of the medium.
Yeah.
So sorry to have instrumentalized you today, but I mean, it was really that. How do I put myself in? But I also think it's worth noting that, like, there's the collectives that we meet today, and they're very apparent and obvious and like very like present, but also all sound, Zahra, all sound is an echo. Sorry, it was just like a thing that we said earlier, and it like really sparked in my mind, and it stayed with me. That one of our friends said, really, like, everything we hear today is an echo of something that has happened in the past. We inherit our languages, we inherit our musical languages, we inherit our modalities, we inherit the tonalities that we know, we inherit what we think is beautiful and what is not, and we inherit ways of seeing and we challenge them. So there's kind of being in collective, like working already with archive material, working with field research inherently means that I'm working with a collectivity. And I think there's something really fun about breaking that as well, like saying, this is kind of Palestinian, kind of not. This is kind of about music, kind of not. Kind of about music, kind of about studenthood, like that nodule of like thing that we all have to do at some point in our lives somehow. So is that a collectivity? Then is this one the collectivity that I'm belonging to? Is this one the collectivity that I'm belonging to? And I guess I saw that quite a bit in your work, because there's like also a breaking of blackness, like making like, and is that then the community that we belong to and then not? So kind of, I think what's most fun about the work is resonating with community in ways that also breaks the borders of adds more porousness to what is and isn't a community. And I think particularly sound as a medium is helpful for this, specifically because of how it circulates. It really helps us metaphorically think about like infiltrating the body or by accident or secretly, or and that's, I guess, something that like we can see power structures do, like with the ambulance siren and with like the war siren and with who gets like the pop music that gets to be in public space and the music that doesn't get to be in public space. All of those infiltrations are kind of already happening, and they make us into a community, whether or not we like it, in a way. They make it into a city. They make it into a thing. So,
amen.
And I think that, there's ways that we can do that from below as well, that are quite like infiltration-y and sideways.
You can talk back, kind of.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Brahim.
Yeah, it's fine. I think in each work there like communal work shows up, and like I think it's also, as I said about this text, like I could be writing on at my kitchen table, but then also it has to be sent into the world somehow. Like it has to connect somehow. It has to have other voices somehow, and it's something that's slowly seeping into my practice rather than something that it started from. I feel like a lot, like my practice started quite individualistic in some way, because also photography is often this kind of, you do everything on your own and you're by yourself, or like in the dark room, or you're like you're editing pictures or stuff like this. And sometimes you take pictures of a subject, but it never really felt that communal. And more like through exploring cinema, through exploring performance, suddenly you have to work with people, and the more I do that, the more I realize that it's actually what I like. Because like when I was a bit younger, I was a bit more stubborn and like. But yeah, so I don't think I have a beautiful answer. Like, I'm a bit more like, I think it's something that I'm exploring more and more and finding ways to do. Like, I think like my next film, I worked with my family mostly in Senegal and also in Spain, and for me that was there was this way of like, how can I, besides the film itself and the work that it will produce, how can I had a Belgian budget. Like, how can I get that money from Belgium to Africa? Like, how can I use the system to kind of, mistreat it a little bit? So I think it's more in this than in these gestures that I feel a lot of community also, or like a lot of ways of bending certain systems that are there to support us, but then at the same time use them to support other. So like that's, I think, those are examples of that. Or like even with this, just asking all my friends to sing and sing together, and then make it come together, and also realizing that if you this work, like if you listen to it on your own, it's nice, like, but if you listen to it with a full room, it's so much nicer, in my opinion. Like suddenly the work and the audience like blend, and the sound of the audience becomes part of the work, and and you start to kind of, the voices become people in like, a voice goes away and then suddenly it comes back and you're like, there's a person, but because you're surrounded, and it's like this. I say this way too much, but like it feels the difference between going to the cinema alone, which is a nice experience, or in a full room and experiencing something with an energy of a group. It's so much nicer. So yeah.
I think that's really, first of all, y'all need to go see that installation. But I think the irony of the situation is that we've made a distinction between like the individual and the collective. But I think through participating in the collective, you can relate to yourself better as an individual. You know, and this Sufi saying that you're not just a drop in the ocean, but you're also the whole ocean in a drop at the same time.